You clicked because of the blood. Because someone told you a machine read a language dead for 4,000 years, and what it found was hidden inside your own veins. Stay right there. Because what I'm about to show you is not a myth. It is a set of clay tablets, cataloged, numbered, and sitting in real museums right now. And when modern artificial intelligence was pointed at the broken pieces nobody could finish reading, it reconstructed a claim that should not exist. That humanity was engineered. That we carry in our bloodline the ghost of something that was killed on purpose. And I need to be honest with you before we go one step further. I did not believe a word of this. I thought it was recycled nonsense, the same tired Anunnaki story every channel repeats. I remember sitting at my desk at almost 3 in the morning with a printout of the Sumerian King List in one hand and a cold cup of coffee I forgot to drink, staring at a single number I could not explain away. And the reason this stayed buried is simple. The tablets that hold the answer are shattered into thousands of fragments, scattered across 3 continents, and no human being could ever read them all, until now. Everything I'm going to tell you traces back to a specific object, a 4-sided clay prism, roughly 20 centimeters tall, catalogued as WB444, held in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England. It was pulled out of the ground in 1922, and what is written on it is where my problem started. That prism is called the Weld-Blundell Prism. It's the most complete copy we have of the Sumerian King List, a document written around 4,000 years ago that names the kings who ruled the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Ordinary administrative record on the surface. Boring, even. Kings, cities, how long each one ruled, but look at the reigns. The list opens with a line that translates roughly as when kingship first descended from heaven. Then it names the first king, Alulim, in the city of Eridu. And it says he ruled for 28,800 years, not 28 years, not 280, 28,800. The next king, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000 years. Add up the 8 kings the list places before the Great Flood, and you get a total of 241,200 years of continuous rule by a handful of men. Then the list says the flood swept over the earth, and after the flood, something changes. The numbers start to fall. Kings begin ruling for hundreds of years, then for decades, until eventually the reigns look completely normal, like the reigns of real historical rulers we can confirm from other records. That is the detail that stopped me at 3 in the morning, because a fairy tale doesn't do that. A made-up story keeps the magic all the way through. This document starts impossible and then slowly, mathematically decays into the ordinary. It behaves less like a legend and more like a record of something degrading over time. And when I tried to find the tidy explanation, the one that would let me close the file and go to sleep, I couldn't make it hold. Here is the explanation the textbooks reach for, and I want you to hear it fairly, because I reached for it too. The standard answer is that the Sumerians used a base 60 counting system, what mathematicians call sexagesimal, and that the scribes were just showing off with big symbolic numbers to make their god kings sound grand. Round numbers, priestly exaggeration, nothing to see. That works for about 5 minutes, then it falls apart. Because when the scholar Dwight Young studied these numbers closely, he found the reigns weren't just random giant figures. Many of them are perfect squares and specific combinations built on the numbers 60 and 3,600. There's a hidden mathematical structure in there, deliberate, precise, encoded. That is not a scribe rounding up to sound impressive. That is someone recording data inside a system, and a system implies the numbers meant something exact to the people writing them, something they understood and we no longer do. So now I had a document that decays from impossible to real, built on hidden mathematics, and I had a museum object with a catalog number to prove it exists. But the King List only tells you that these long-lived rulers were there. It never tells you what they were or where the people they ruled came from. For that, I had to go to the tablets that were too broken to read, and this is where the machines come in. For 170 years, cuneiform has been a nightmare to translate. It is the oldest writing system on Earth, pressed into wet clay with a reed, and there are hundreds of thousands of these tablets in museum basements that have never been fully read because we simply do not have enough humans alive who can read the languages. Akkadian, Sumerian, Old Babylonian. It can take a specialist an entire career to master one dialect. The British Museum alone holds around 130,000 cuneiform tablets, and a huge share of them have never been translated at all. Then, in 2023, a team led by researchers including Shai Gordine at Ariel University and Guy Guthers published something in the journal PNAS Nexus. They built an artificial intelligence model that translates Akkadian cuneiform directly into English automatically. A neural network trained the same way the translation tools on your phone are trained. For the first time, a machine could take these signs and produce readable text in seconds. At the same time, at the University of Munich, a scholar named Enrique Jimenez built something called the Fragmentarium. It's a database where an algorithm compares tens of thousands of broken tablet fragments against each other, looking for pieces that fit the way you'd solve a jigsaw puzzle if the puzzle had 80,000 pieces and half of them were missing. And it worked. In 2023, that system identified fragments that added brand new lines to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the most famous story in Mesopotamian literature, lines no living person had read in over 2,000 years. Sit with that for a second. A machine reassembled sentences that had been shattered and lost since before the Roman Empire. It recovered words that every human expert had given up on. And once I understood the machines could do that, I asked the obvious question, but before I tell you what I found, I have to point you towards something I put together outside this video. I spent months going deeper than any single video allows, tracing the hidden systems inside these texts, the encoded numbers, the bloodline logic, the suppressed translations, and I documented all of it in 3 books. First, Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems. Together, they lay out the full case, source by source, tablet by tablet, in a way that holds up to scrutiny. If you're the kind of person who pulls threads and doesn't stop, you'll find everything you need at loststoragens.org. The link is in the description. All 3 books, $97, and they go places this video can't. Now, back to that obvious question and why the answer stopped me cold. If they can rebuild Gilgamesh, what else have they rebuilt? What other broken tablets have been quietly pieced back together? And why had I never heard anyone talk about what those tablets actually say about where human beings came from? That's when I stopped researching a myth and started chasing a cover story. Now, I promised myself I wouldn't throw the word cover up around because it's cheap and everyone does it. So let me be precise about what I mean. I don't think there's a single villain hiding these tablets in a vault. What I found is quieter and honestly worse. I found a pattern where the most disturbing lines in these texts get translated into dry, academic, deliberately flattened language, footnoted into oblivion, and filed under mythology so no one ever has to explain them. The information was never destroyed. It was made boring on purpose. And boring is the most effective hiding place there is. Let me show you what they made boring. There's a text called the Atrahasis Epic. It's older than the Bible, older than most of Greek myth, written in Old Babylonian and pieced together largely from tablets copied by a scribe named Kuaya around 1646 or 1626 BC. The definitive scholarly edition was published in 1969 by 2 researchers, W.G. Lambert and A.R. Millard, in a book simply titled Atrahasis. This is not fringe material, it is the bedrock of the field. And it tells the story of why human beings were created. According to the text, in the beginning, before there were people, the work of the world was done by a lower class of gods. They dug the rivers, they hauled the earth, they dredged the canals that made the land livable. And after what the tablet counts as thousands of years of this labor, they broke, they revolted, they burned their tools and surrounded the house of the chief god in the middle of the night, refusing to dig one more basket of dirt. So the gods came up with a solution. They would create a new creature to carry the labor for them, a worker And the way they made that worker is the single most disturbing thing I have ever read in an ancient document. They didn't make us from clay alone. That's the sanitized version you half remember. Read the actual reconstructed lines, and it's specific and clinical. The gods take one of their own, a god named Wila, sometimes rendered as Au Ilu, a god described as the one who had intelligence, and they kill him, deliberately, in an assembly. Then they mix his flesh and his blood into the clay. And here is the line that made the hair stand up on my arms. The text says that from the flesh of the god, a spirit remained in the human being. The Akkadian word is a temmu. It means ghost. A ghost of the slain god carried inside the clay of the human body so that this ghost would exist forever and never be forgotten. The blood of a murdered, intelligent god threaded permanently into our biology, passed down, the text implies, through every generation that followed. That is where the phrase human bloodline stops being a metaphor. Now I want to talk directly to the part of you that is pushing back right now, because there's a voice in your head saying, come on, it's a creation myth. Every culture has one. Humans made from clay, and divine blood is just poetry. I had that exact voice. I trusted that voice. This next part is for you specifically, the skeptic, because if you leave now, you'll miss the exact moment the ordinary explanation cracked for me. Here's the honest skeptic's case. Ancient people wanted to explain why life is full of suffering and labor, so they invented a story where we were literally built to work. The divine blood is just a way of saying humans are special, that we have a spark of the gods in us. It's a beautiful metaphor, nothing more. And every other flood and creation story, including the ones in the book of Genesis, is just borrowing from this same pool of regional folklore. Case closed. Go to bed. I believe that. And then 3 things stop me, and I need you to weigh them the way I had to. First, the word choice. The scholars who translated Etemu did not translate it as soul or spirit of life in some warm general sense. Lambert and Millard were careful, conservative academics, and they rendered it as ghost, the ghost specifically of the individual god who was killed. The text goes out of its way to say, this ghost exists so the dead god will be remembered by his own drumbeat, a pulse inside us, marking that something was killed to make us. That is not the language of a feel-good myth about human specialness. That is the language of a record of an event with a victim and a permanent consequence. Second, the purpose is wrong for a myth. Most creation myths flatter the humans. They tell you that you are the beloved children of the gods, made in their image out of love. Atrahasis tells you something no culture invents to feel good about itself. It tells you that you were manufactured as a labor unit, that your entire species exists because a higher order of beings did not want to work anymore. Nobody writes that to comfort themselves. It reads like an admission. Third, and this is the one that broke it for me, the consistency across the machine reconstructed fragments. When the artificial intelligence tools started stitching the scattered copies of these texts together from tablets found in different cities, written centuries apart by different scribes who never met, the core of the story did not drift the way legends drift. The details stayed locked. The revolt of the lower gods, the killing of the intelligent god, the blood in the clay, the ghost that remains. Folklore mutates as it travels. This didn't mutate. It stayed fixed, like a fact being copied, not a story being retold. So the tidy explanation, the one I wanted, requires me to believe that people across hundreds of years independently chose to describe their own origin as an industrial accident involving a murdered god, and never softened it, never made it flattering, and encoded it in language a modern machine could reassemble into one consistent account. At some point, holding a story stops being faith and starts being denial. But even then I told myself, fine, it's a consistent myth. Consistent doesn't mean true. And I would have left it there. I really would have, if the machines hadn't found something in the numbers that connected back to that prism in Oxford. Because remember the reigns, 28,800 years. The impossible lifespans of the kings before the flood. Here's what nobody had connected for me until I laid the 2 documents side by side. The Atrahasis Epic and the Sumerian King List describe the same before the flood world, and in that world the beings in charge live for tens of thousands of years, while the newly created humans, the workers, do not. The King List's long reigns aren't spread evenly across history. They're concentrated entirely in the age before humanity was fully, independently established. They belong to the rulers who came down from heaven, the same category of being that Atrahasis says created us and carried the original divine blood undiluted. And then the flood hits both documents. And after the flood, in both texts, something fundamental changes. The lifespans collapse. The gap between the rulers and the ruled closes. The world becomes recognizably human. Run that as data instead of poetry, and a chilling shape appears. A population that started with extreme longevity, and a bloodline that generation after generation after the flood degraded toward the ordinary human lifespan we know today. The exact mathematical decay I saw on that prism at 3 in the morning, the numbers falling step by step from the impossible to the mundane, that is what the flattened translations never let you see. Read as separate myths, they're just old stories. Read together, reassembled, cross-referenced the way these new tools allow. They read like the two halves of a single record. One document tells you what was made and what it was made from. The other tells you how long the different bloodlines lasted and how the divine one thinned out over time until it was almost gone. And almost gone is not gone. This is the part I chase the hardest, and it's where the hero of this story finally appears. Not a person, a record, a specific tablet that refused to stay silent. Because I kept asking, if there was a divine component in the human bloodline, does any text say what happened to it? Does anything say it survived the flood? And the answer sits in the reconstructed Atrahasis material and the flood tablets alongside it. The flood, in the original Mesopotamian version, was not a random act of nature. According to the text, the chief god Enlil sent it on purpose because humanity had multiplied and grown loud and he wanted them wiped out. The flood was an attempt to erase the workers, to delete the experiment, and one god broke ranks. The god of wisdom, called Enki or Ea, the same god associated with the creation of humans in the first place, warned one man. He told him to build a boat and preserve life. That man, in the oldest version, is Atrahasis himself, whose name literally means exceedingly wise. He is the reason there was anyone left. He is the survivor who carried the bloodline, the divine ghost, and all, through the water and out the other side. Do you understand what that makes the flood story? It's not a story about God's judgment. In the original, it's a story about a deliberate attempt to destroy a created species and a single act of preservation that let the bloodline continue. Every human alive, in the logic of these tablets, descends from the survivors who carried that murdered God's ghost forward. And the reason I call the tablet the hero is this. The most detailed version of that flood account, the one that names the deliberate intent to wipe humanity out, survived on fragments that were smashed, scattered, and nearly lost. The knowledge was almost erased twice. Once in the story by the flood itself, and once in reality when the tablets shattered in the ground and lay unreadable for thousands of years. It was the pattern matching, the machine reassembly, the same technology that rebuilt Gilgamesh that pulled these pieces back together and let the full, ugly intent of the text be read again. The information was buried by time, flattened by cautious translation, filed under mythology, and it clawed its way back into readable light anyway. So let me tell you what I think happened and why I can no longer file this away. I think the Sumerians and Babylonians were not inventing a religion when they wrote this. I think they were preserving a memory, and the only technology they had, wet clay, of an origin they did not fully understand but did not dare to change. A memory of beings who lived impossibly long, who did the shaping, who made a working population out of clay and the blood of one of their own, and who left a permanent trace inside that population, a ghost, a pulse, something that was meant to be remembered forever. They wrote it down with hidden mathematics and the numbers. They kept the details fixed across centuries. They refused to make it flattering. And then they buried it, not to hide it, but because that is what happens to clay tablets when the cities that made them fall, the desert, took the record. And for almost 4,000 years, the answer to the oldest question we have, where did we come from, sat in fragments in the dark, unreadable, until we finally built a mind fast enough to read what we had forgotten how to read. I started this thinking I'd find a base 60 math trick and a flattering myth, and I'd sleep fine. Instead, I found a document that decays like real data, a creation account too unflattering to be comfort, and a bloodline the texts insist we still carry, thinned but never fully erased. All of it recovered by machines that can read the dead. I don't know for certain what the people who pressed those reeds into clay actually witnessed, but I know they were desperate for us not to forget it. And I know that for 4,000 years, we almost did. You are still here at the end of this because you're the kind of person who feels it in your gut when the official answer is too smooth, too quick, too eager to change the subject. You don't accept it's just a myth when the myth behaves like a record. You pull the thread. And that instinct, that refusal to look away, is exactly what let this survive. So I want to hand one specific thing to you, and I want you to answer me the word etemmu. The ghost of the slain god said to remain in human flesh forever, marked by a pulse. Do you think that's poetry, or do you think those scribes were describing something real that they no longer had the words for? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read every one of them, and I want to know who's out here pulling these threads with me. If you felt that chill, if you're the kind of person who can't let a contradiction go, then you already belong here with the rest of us who keep reopening the cases everyone swears are closed. Because there's one more thing I couldn't fit into this one. There's a second set of tablets from the same region describing a sealed chamber and a list of things that were placed inside it before the flood, meant to be found again after. I found the catalog reference. I'm chasing where it leads next. Stay with me, and I'll bring you what I find. I'm not stopping here inside the Unexplained Society. I take this exact story further, decoding those bloodlines tablet by tablet, the part we couldn't fit here. And in there, you can ask me your own question. A real person me answers you, not some machine. You won't be doing this alone. You belong with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel anytime, one click. Now, if those bloodline secrets shook you, wait until you hear what happened when a quantum machine was asked who truly built the pyramids. The answer changes everything, and it's starting right here.